Hello furniture friends! This week I'm going to bring you guys along with me as I take the bottom section of what used to be a massive 1970s wall unit and turn it into a much more modern console. Like I said, this is just the bottom section of what used to be an 8-foot tall wall unit. The big, massive shelving unit that sat on the back wasn't something that I really wanted to take on, but I did see a ton of potential in the bottom of this piece. I think this thing is late 70s at its finest. I am obsessed with these cane inserts. We all know those are right on trend right now. And the hardware, although it's badly corroded, is stunning. We're gonna need to build a new top for it, and I'm gonna be replacing the bottom as well because there's a lot of water damage. This piece is constructed exclusively of particle board and plastic. There is no wood to be found on this one, but that's okay. First things first, you always have to start a furniture flip by taking everything apart. I removed all of the drawers and took all of the hardware off of the drawers and the doors. Next up, I needed to remove the top that was on this piece, which is really just a little ledge because behind that was a big shelving unit. So I just went through with my screwdriver and unclipped all of the brackets that were holding it on while my husband Doug was cutting down a new large piece of MDF that will become our new top. There he is back there, construction in flip-flops. That's how we roll. We actually put the MDF down on some sawhorses and then turned the unit upside down to attach it with the same brackets that were holding the old top on. And while we have it upside down like this, we also went ahead and removed all of the brackets that were holding the bottom on so that we could start building a new base. These front and back kick plates didn't actually provide any structural support to the piece. They never made contact with the ground. All of the weight of this unit was sitting on these two end pieces, which, like I said, are pretty badly water damaged. So what we ended up deciding to do was just take a straight edge and the circular saw and cut these end pieces off flush with the rest of the bottom of the unit. Now that the bottom of this piece is nice and flush, I'm gonna go ahead and start building a new base. This is actually going to be the same DIY wife inspired base that I built a few videos back on a little cedar chest. I built that one out of red oak as the original designer of the base, Andrea, suggested to do for extra strength and support. But because the cost of lumber is so insane right now, and my hardware stores don't actually sell red oak in the length that I needed, I decided to go with select pine. I'm using two 1x3 by 8 foot lengths to do the front, back, and sides, and then I grabbed one 2x2 by 8 to do the legs. The most complicated thing about this base for me anyways is measuring. I measured the full length of my piece, subtracted half an inch from that measurement because I want the base to sit about a 1/4 inch in on all sides. And then I also had to subtract the 1.5 inches off of each end for the 2x2 legs. I hope that makes sense. Once you get all of your measurements, it's just a matter of cutting down your boards. I used our miter saw to do this. I actually also figured out how to adjust the angle on the miter saw, which I didn't know how to do last time, so that I could cut these cute little angles on the two front feet. If you want a more in-depth tutorial on how to build this base and how it all comes together, I highly recommend heading over to Andrea's channel, DIY Wife. I'll leave a link to the specific base building video down in the description box here. Once I had all of my pieces cut to length, I grabbed my Kreg jig. This is an ingenious little system. I just have the basic unit here that helps you create pocket holes properly measured and spaced in your wood so that you can attach your pieces together with no visible screws. The last step before I started assembling my base was just to give it a really quick sand down with some 220 grit sandpaper to remove any rough cut edges and just make sure it was nice and smooth. I used a little bit of wood glue in all of my joints and then used the Craig screws that are designed specifically for softwood like pine that I'm using here to start screwing everything together. And it fits. Yay, math. It's about a 1/4 inch smaller than the base of the unit, which is exactly what I wanted. And instead of using more pocket holes to drill into the base, I actually just reused the same brackets that were holding the old base to attach my new one. I'm just making one alteration to Andrea's original design, mostly because I'm using pine, which is a softwood, and Andrea typically uses a hardwood. I was concerned that with this really heavy piece and people potentially dragging it across the floor to move it around or clean around it, that the legs may not hold up the best over time. So I went ahead and grabbed some of my offcut pieces and cut 45-degree angles on both ends and just screwed those in each corner to provide a little extra strength and stability. I also used just a little bit of lightweight wood filler to cover up all of my seams. Before we flipped the unit back over, I thought this would be a good opportunity to get at that base and sand everything smooth. Then I started scuff sanding the bottom of the piece when I realized I hadn't cleaned it yet. So pause on the sanding, I have to clean. I went ahead and gave the rest of the piece a quick light scuff sand with some 220 sandpaper, and I wanted to preserve this cane, so I came in with some green low-tack painter's tape and taped off all of the cane panels. The next morning I had everything flipped back over the right way around and it was time to prime. I'm using my gravity-fed HVLP pneumatic spray gun with my 30-gallon air compressor to apply 2 coats of bin shellac base primer. This primer is going to serve a few different purposes for me on this project. This raw MDF top needs to be sealed so it isn't just soaking up tons and tons of paint. So this shellac base primer will completely seal the porous MDF. It's also going to provide me a consistent finish from the MDF to the laminate and plastic on the rest of the piece. And it is going to block in any stains or odors from old nicotine. This shellac-based primer does not like water, so I need to make sure that my gun is fully dry before I add the primer in. And then when I'm done, I just give it a quick swish out with some regular household ammonia to break down that shellac, and then I can take it inside and rinse it out as normal. My primer took about 2 hours to dry nice and hard, so I came back with some 400 grit sandpaper to give it a quick smooth out before I move on to paint. From the very beginning of this project, I knew I wanted to paint it black. And then when I got to the paint step, I second guessed myself and I thought maybe the black is going to be too harsh against that warm caramel toned cane. So I went down to my paint stash and found this house and canvas color called Leather, which is a gorgeous, leathery, milk chocolate brown, and I had a really good, long, hard think about it. I wasn't sure if it was the right choice. I really wasn't sure, but I talked myself into giving it a try. So I did end up loading up my spray gun again with some of this milk chocolate brown paint and spraying a coat over the piece. As soon as I finished spraying that coat of brown, I took a step back and I knew that I had made a mistake. This is not the look that I want for this piece. I did take a few minutes to peel back some of the masking tape and kind of assess the caramel brown cane with the brown paint, and it wasn't right. It just wasn't right. I did also reach out to my Instagram friends and followers in my stories to ask for their opinion, and their overwhelming response was that it needed to be black and that it needed to be all black. So that is the new plan from here. I'm going to paint it all solid black. I loaded up my spray gun one more time with House and Canvas in shadow and started over again. This paint dries very quickly. It's usually ready for recoat in an hour or two. I ended up applying 2 full coats of shadow over the whole piece, inside and out. And then I came back a few hours later to top coat it with my favorite Varathane Diamond Wood Finish in a satin sheen. You guys have seen me do this a million times before, especially over black. I always like to tint my top coat with a little bit of the color. This really helps reduce the risk of cloudiness or streakiness that is super common when using a liquid top coat over dark colors. I sprayed my first coat of top coat, and while that was drying out in the garage, I brought the hardware into the kitchen to see if I could do anything to clean up brass hardware like this. I really like to boil it first in equal parts of water and distilled white vinegar. I usually let it boil for between 5 to 10 minutes depending on how gunky it is, and then carefully pull it out with some tongs and let it cool down a bit. Once it's cool enough to handle, I sprinkle it with some Barkeeper's Friend and use some super fine steel wool to start polishing. Look at the difference in these 2 back plates. That's crazy. Unfortunately, they didn't all clean up quite enough for my liking, so I decided I was going to need to paint them. I took them outside and gave them a quick spray with some Rust-Oleum Metallic in Antique Bronze. And then when I came back inside, yet another design dilemma. It looked too much like spray paint. So I went down into my paint stash again and found some of this Modern Masters brass paint and used a little sea sponge to kind of sporadically blot that on to give these a little bit more dimension. I reinstalled the pulls onto the drawer fronts and they still weren't right. They just didn't look right. They were too bright and too shiny. So I grabbed a paintbrush with a tiny bit of my black paint, dabbed off all the excess, and then dry brushed some black back over the hardware. This is just gonna sit on all of the high points and down in any detailed areas. Again, give it some more dimension, but ultimately leave me back with the tarnished antique brass look that I started with. but not corroded and green on the bottom. It's a uniform look across all of the hardware. Sometimes this is just how it goes. It's just not easy. You're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna make the wrong call, and you just have to keep moving forward and making adjustments to colors and techniques and textures until you get a look that you're happy with. It's not always step 1, step 2, step 3. Sometimes you have to take a couple of steps back in order to start moving forward. That's kind of the beauty and the interest in this art. The last thing I needed to do was reinstall the magnetic door catches on the inside of the cabinet. And now let me show you what this on its way to the landfill 1979 particle board half a wall unit looks like now. Numbers time. I spent a total of 7.5 hours on labor working on this piece, and my materials expenses for lumber, paint, primer, and top coat come in about $90. This is usually the part in the video where I tell you guys how I'm going to price this piece for sale in my market, but I want to change things up a little bit this week, so I'm going to ask you, how do you think this piece should be priced? Make sure that you let me know down in the comments section. Thank you so much for hanging out with me again this week. Make sure that you are subscribed before you go, and I will catch you guys next time. I'm sweating. It is so humid.